Hey everyone, and welcome back to this video tutorial series. So in this episode we're going to be focusing primarily on the primitive nodes to begin with, and then we'll take a look at some of the adjustment and filter nodes as well. I just want to give you guys a brief overview and a glimpse at what's available to us, what the nodes do, and how we can manipulate them. So let's jump straight right in. There's a lot to get through. So right now we have the mountain node in the viewport, and even this single node can give us a lot of variation. And over here on the right, we have some options. So we have the scale. And if I just change the scale, you'll see that our mountain is starting to update and we can get some unique looking results. Something like this. We can change the edge, which is going to kind of shrink the terrain in and push it down. So I'm going to keep that at 0. And then the seed. So even the scale, once I found a good number, I can start changing the random seed and just keep using this until I get a result that I like. So there's almost infinite variations, and even if that doesn't fulfill your needs, then over here in type we have A, B, C, and D, so 4 different terrain mountain types. I can just cycle through these, maybe go D, and then in the height we can go from natural to equalized or enhanced. So even this one node has tons of options of variations, and that goes the same for all of the nodes. So this is the mountain node. Let's take a look at the Voronoi, kind of I guess a procedural artist's favorite node is the Voronoi node, and this one we have a few options. So the scale, we can just change this around, go really small, or just go all the way to 98%. We can do dual, so 2 Voronois together, and at this point we need to clamp this. So every node in Gaea has these 5 options down here, and clamp is a very useful one. I can just shrink this to 18%, get this a bit more flat and natural, and if I tick dual, you'll see that we're getting 2 Voronois, and I can change the seed, get something that looks nice. And then I have some more options. So I have the warp frequency, get something that looks like this. I could then blur this to get this looking a bit more natural. And then we have some advanced settings, so we can go for, I don't even know how to say that, it's Ludian, I'm not sure, and change the form. So this has, I think, 8 different form types of how the Voronoi is working. So tons of different options. If I change this to S, you'll see that that's given us a slightly different result. If I go to N, wow, that looks interesting. Let's go to R. Cool, so it's like a sort of, you could say, lava that's kind of solidified. Could be interesting. Next one we have a Voronoi Plus. So here it's not exactly the same as the Voronoi, it's a different version, but the idea is the same. So we have a Voronoi pattern. I can change the iterations to maybe 30, so the higher the iterations, the more patterns we have. I can change the distribution to a +1 or a random that we had, or maybe even a grid-like pattern. And then edges, we have some noisy edges. We can increase the strength of this, really make this broken, the density. And then again, we would clamp this to kind of be a bit more close together on the ground. And, this could work as a sort of canyon or desert type biome. And we blend this with another one and we would actually have something useful. And then we can just change the seed until we get something that we like. So I mean, the Voronoi Plus and Voronoi nodes give us quite a lot of flexibility. What else have we got? We could take the slope noise is a pretty standard node. It's pretty much a random noise on a slope. We can change the displacement and then the scale. We can stratify this. And then change the direction as well. Of course, the next node we can take a look at is plates. If we just drag and drop this, you see that we're getting these plate-like formations. We can, again, change the scale of this, get something that looks like that. But you get the idea of how we can manipulate these. They all follow the same formula of manipulating on the right. Island, I'm pretty sure we can draw on the island. And you'll see that we get this result here, and we can change the breakage, something like that, complexity. and it's very similar to the draw node. So the draw node lets us just kind of manipulate and paint on this as we would. Maybe we have a blob here, and we'll let that update in the viewport, and you see now we've got some nice looking terrain here, and now we can begin manipulating this the same way we would any other node. We can increase the height, change the sprawl, and then play with the settings on the synthesis. Maybe update the displacement, play with the scale, etc, etc. So all of the primitive nodes follow the same formula here. My favorite is the Ignis. I think this one is one of the best nodes, but of course it takes a bit more time to work, to update in the viewport, but we can just enable channels. You see that takes a bit of time, and if I just play with the seed until I find something that looks good, I always find this a great starting point to work with, and I can just clamp this and start using this to manipulate my terrain. Also, actually go back to the Voronoi that I had. So you can see there's a lot of noise, a lot of micro frequency details here, which I might not want, and we can start using some of the adjustments to fix this. So we could drag and drop a blur node, and you'll see instantly that the blur node is highlighted red. And what that's telling us is, well, one, we have is pending changes, it needs to update. And the reason it's red is because it requires an input, whereas the primitive node doesn't. So we can just feed our Voronoi into the blur node, and you'll see instantly that it's updated. And we have two options. We have the iteration, so the amount of times that it's running the blur node, and the strength, which is the power. And we have different types. So this one's currently fast. We have Gaussian, motion, radial, smooth. If we go with smooth, you can see everything's kind of softened out, and I can increase the strength. But we're going to keep this quite subtle. We don't want to lose the large forms of our terrain. We see we have a clamp. Personally, I avoid using the node. I tend to just clamp the actual node itself. So you can see we've clamped that there, but if I come to the blur node and enable clamp down here, I can achieve the same result. So I tend to just use that instead of the node, and we're just going to highlight and press delete. So another good noise is the denoise node. So if I just drag and drop that, I mean, it's in the name, this is going to just try to reduce the noise inside of our height map. So if I just plug, say, maybe the mountain into the denoise, so we can increase the strength. Let's go something really strong. And it's taking a bit of time to update and calculate this. But you can see we're going from this mounted to this. So it's trying to calculate where the high frequency noise is and just soften that up. So you kind of think of it as a selected blur placement. Sometimes pretty useful. Then we have displace, and this is one of my favorites. So it just breaks up the procedural feel and look of your terrain. And for this one, let's take the place. You can see that we need to click. Yeah, so it's not like Substance where you can just click and then manipulate the graph. We need to bring it close, plug it in. So what this place is doing, if I click on place and we look at the top, you can see it's starting to warp a little bit, and we have a lot of options. So the current method, we're going to go with its standard. I can push this a lot to really break up our terrain and get this natural looking formations. We can change the scale of the noise that's warping everything. The iterative, we can go high quality, again change the location, and always just change the random seed until we get something that looks nice. Clamp it to make it feel a bit more natural, and then we could blend this on top of another terrain. So I could take both of these, like this funky thing as well as this. I can highlight them both and just do the multi-mix, which is going to combine them. And you'll see that right now we're using blends. So 50 is going to be one terrain visible. If I do 50%, it's going to blend them both slightly together, and I can just cycle through the different methods, min, max. And we get something like this. So we're going from that to this. Let's take to 50. Cool. because it's quite noisy at this point. Let's continue. So we have flip. Let's jump into this and just plug that in. So flip is pretty much just flipping our terrain either horizontally, vertically, or both. So we can just pretty much flip the terrain. Gamma, heal, invert. So invert's going to flip our terrain -1. So you can see right now this stuff is going down, and if I flip back to here, it's sticking out. So you might want to flip maybe one of your mountains into the terrain. So that'd be a great way to achieve that. Heal kind of is very similar to the denoise. It tries to soften up the terrain. Blur does it everywhere. Heal tends to focus on the I want to say the cavities or the concaves. You can see here. So if I bump this up, you're still keeping all of the sharp edges, but everything else is being softened. Whereas in the blur node, everything is being blurred. So this actually gives us a pretty cool looking result. And we can tick on the advanced, and you see it's instantly changing, and we can change the iterations of that. So loads of control here, and then parallel processing. So how big are the chunks, edge blending, etc., etc. So between heal, denoise, and blur, you have quite a few options to really soften up your terrain and blend everything together. And then we have sign, sharpen, shaper. So if we just drag all three, we'll get shaper. Sharpen is obviously the opposite of what we've been looking at. Sign, I do not remember what sign does, so we're going to learn that one together. Transform and zero border. I think that's all of them, and we didn't grab threshold. So yeah, I'm just trying to go through everything with all of you. The reason I haven't dragged the gamma node is because it does the same as clamp and auto level. We have auto levels here. We have clamp, and I'm pretty sure gamma is the log. But we're going to drag it anyway, just so that you guys can see the node as well. So if we go from heal to shaper, you can kind of see what this one is doing. Is pretty much pushing everything up. And then when it hits a certain point, it's flattening everything. So this is very similar to the bias and gain. Sharpen is going to do what's in the node name. It's just going to sharpen everything on the terrain. So all of the high peaks at this point, or areas that are more prominent, are being sharpened first. So remove that one. The sign node, let's plug that in and just play this. Cool, so you can see right now what the sign's doing is kind of creating the wave-like pattern that it normally does. You can use this for pulsating emissive inside Unreal, but we have these huge high peaks and it's dropping down and coming back up and dropping down. So but maybe you're making an alien environment that could benefit from this. And then the gamma node is pretty much pushing the terrain up. Again, you could achieve this with the bias and gain. Just by pushing your terrain up and down. So, you might have a mountain that you need to be higher than the dune, so you could use the gamma to manipulate this and just bring it up a bit higher. And then what we have here is, transform is pretty self-explanatory. We can use this to move our terrain around like this. I've yet to find a use case scenario for this, to be honest, other than moving a terrain to a specific point. But for me, that defeats the point of procedural terrain. Maybe you place a mountain in a specific area, but personally, I would do that in engine. And then zero borders is going to just kind of flatten the borders of the terrain, so we can blur the amount here. So this would be great for building stamps that you could then paint inside Unreal Engine 4 or maybe Unity. Just pop down these erosion patches in your terrain. So this one's actually very useful. And then threshold. So we can take a look at this. This one I rarely use. I don't use all of the nodes. I don't really. Sometimes I can just achieve what I need with a few of the others. So You can see threshold gives us these really arbitrary, at least in my opinion, results. Like I really have no idea what I would do with this. And that's just me being honest. There's a few nodes I stick to, there's a few I don't use. And unfortunately, this is one of the few that I don't use. So the adjustments, in a sense, they're nodes that let you just kind of, I don't want to say adjust, but do subtle alterations to your terrain to prepare them for erosion. So we use the primitive nodes to get the base foundation. We use the adjustments to slightly modify our terrain, make sure that there's no anomalies or anything. And then we could pipe that into a filter or an erosion node. So I just want to come back here and let's just maybe grab the igneous. We're going to bring the clamping back up. So we're going to work with this node here with some of the filters. And we're just going to drag maybe the first four. So we're going to grab the aperture, the apex, bomber, and the cells node. So the filters are, I mean, you could think of like Photoshop filters, for example, where you get these unusual or interesting different styles. So these aren't like adjustments. And if I plug our igneous into cells, you'll see that it's applying a sort of stylization to the terrain. So we're keeping the same silhouette, same shape, but it's being turned into these cool looking cell formations that might remind you of maybe Scotland or some cave-like formations. And so we could use the same node to put into apex. And if I just change the steepness, you'll see that we're getting this apex-like formation where we're keeping the highest peaks and it's kind of slanting down into the terrain. I can change the mode to slant and just play with the values here. So a lot of these nodes, sometimes you don't really know like really what A and B mean, for example here. But I tend to play with the values until I find something that looks good. It's all about building a terrain that looks believable, but also you want it to look good as well. So we go back to distance. And the nice thing here is there's just one value to change and I can just keep sliding it until I find something that looks nice. Maybe this. And aperture, I always tend to use this. So what this does, it kind of expands the terrain a bit. I mean, in the current method is expand. So if I click on the terrain here and we take a look at this peak here, you see it's kind of expanding a little bit. If I bump up the iterations, you can now see that those areas are being pushed out much further. And if I go here, we're getting these huge plays. We can change this to contract. If I just play with the values here, you see it's kind of shrinking everything if I go a bit higher. And this is more like a canyon, or you could say this like a pit where you fight. And then we have spread and reduce. And from here we could apply an erosion node and really, this could probably turn into a nice looking terrain. We can just play with the random, enable this. We have the parallax options and then the kernel. Not sure what kernel is actually, unfortunately, but we can change this into a different mode. So we go to diamond, corner, let that update. And you'll see that each one is giving us a slightly different result. So it's very easy to quickly update our terrain. Still keep the large forms the same, but just update some of the smaller details. So let's take a look at the noise. I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's just adding noise everywhere on the terrain. I tend to not use this one. I don't really find it useful adding micro information to the terrain. But if it, more power to you if it works. So we're just going to remove this one. Origami. You can see that it's just pretty much turned our terrain into an origami. So it's similar to the cells node. It's doing a similar effect. It's keeping the main shapes, but doing origami based. Could be useful for a stylized environment. Depending on your game, maybe similar to Astroneer, you could maybe do terrain similar to that and just clamp this to flatten the depth. Actually, pretty cool node. Polar. We're going to have to play with the options here, but you can see us pretty much just polarized everything into from one point. And this is a good example. So this is starting there at 315 degrees, and the more I slide it, you can see we're getting a polarization effect. This could be good for an alien sort of environment where you need symmetry. And these 2 points here are almost like mirrored. So that could actually be useful depending on your terrain. And then we have recurve. So let's click this, and what recurve is doing is pretty much just pushing the curves in a specific direction. We'll change the duration. So duration is going to be how long the effect is being applied for, and that's why obviously it takes longer the more we add. We can inflate. I'm going to just bring the duration down a bit. Because you can see we're going from this effect to this. So it's kind of just taking the curve node from Photoshop, you could imagine, and just playing with those effects there. And the smaller the scale I put, kind of getting this bulgy effect on our terrain. So we're going from this to this. So again, this could be useful for you depending on your terrain. And remember, we can always just come in and change the clamp and just get something that isn't as steep as the others. Actually, I'm going to just stick to not the apex. I like the aperture one. This one's good. Oh, and then we have a few more. So we have repulse, rocks, subterrace, swirl, terrace, and wall. So some of these are my favorite ones, and let's just drag and drop all of them. I tend to use subterrace and terrace quite a lot, and whirl is probably one of my favorite nodes, and I've never seen it in any other terrain package. I don't think you could achieve what whirl does in another package, to be honest. It gives some very unique results, and let's just take a look at what it does. If I plug the whirl in, I mean, instantly you can see we have a pretty iconic and memorable looking terrain. I can increase the amount of whirls to get something like this. And if I just clamp the terrain, I mean, this is already a pretty alien environment. Just running through or flying through this is going to be pretty epic. We can change the power of this so we instantly get like this cells or distance like effect that we would make in Photoshop. I can change the type to stretch, which I don't think is going to be ideal for us. But I mean, I just love this node so much. If I plug in, say, let's plug the place in to whirl, and we just change it to change the power, and instantly we get some great looking results. So yeah, this, I mean, I would definitely look into using this node. This one's my favorite. We're going to keep that maybe here, leave it like that. I mean, and from here, I mean, we have some stretchy noises. So this is when I would add a blur and just kind of soften up and get rid of those things. But let's take a look at the other ones quickly. So actually, maybe we can do that. We'll just add a heal. Just clean this up, and we'll plug that into the repulse. So what repulse does is pretty much just bring everything to the center, and you can see this bring everything into the center point here, and it gives us a nice symmetrical pattern similar to the, which node was it, the polar. So similar to the polar, and we can just move this around where we want it, where it's being pulled to. Rocks is pretty similar to the noise node. It's just going to add rocks everywhere. Again, I've actually never found a use for this. I think it adds too much small detail to the terrain. It could be useful adding the rocks to a specific part of your terrain through masks. Getting a little bit more obviously complex there, but it is an option. I've yet to really use it though, but I would probably mask out, say, the lower deposits of a canyon maybe, and just put the rocks there. But again, I would do that in engine with like actual assets or texture. So yeah, not sure. And let's try subterrace. Actually, subterrace isn't going to really work on that. We're going to need a mountain. So let's grab our mountain from over here. We'll just plug that into the hill. So we have that. And if I just add the subterracing, You can instantly see what it's doing. It's just breaking up our mountain into these like sort of mini terraces. Like they're not really one big piece. So this is quite nice. And then alternatively, we have the main terrace. So we can plug the terracing in here. How many do we want? Go for something like that. We can have random, we can all have them the same terrace size, or just break up the uniformity. So there's some large ones, some small ones, change the steepness, get something that looks like that. Reprocess, we can have a soft fall off so it's not as sharp. And just kind of change the processing type. So maybe I want residual. And then I could plug this into the subterrace. So we go from this mountain, we're adding a bit of terracing into it, and then we're breaking that up with some subterracing. And then I would add an erosion node, just a basic erosion. We're going to look into these a bit more, but I could just plug that in and boom. Hey, and there's Dax actually. So funny that's popped up. So Dax is the CEO and owner of Quad Spinner Gaea. So hopefully he's watching this video and gets a laugh out of that. But yeah, so go from this subterrace just to a simple erosion, and we instantly have a nice looking terrain. So it's a great way just to kind of get these large forms and large shapes is always what I go for. Like I don't need every node to look perfect. I just need the large shapes, because I know that at some point I'm going to erode everything and blend everything together. And that's what it does here. So great way to just kind of test things is slap an erosion node down and see what it looks like. And the last node I really want to take a quick peek at is the swell node. So if I just plug our mountain in, I mean, you can see what this does is if this is mixing the mountain, kind of like a cake mix. And if we just plug our whirl node into the swell, you'll see what we get here. So everything's being turned around towards the middle, given that it's this cool looking pattern. And if I plug that into the heel, so I would pin the erosion just by pressing F. And if I plug the swell in, you'll see it updates. And now you can see this is actually a pretty cool looking alien environment. We've got the terracing effect and logic that we applied. We have the sub-terracing logic as well, and it's all being eroded together. And that's what I mean by just not really caring what this looks like per se. So we go from, I want to unpin that. We go from this to this. I mean, this looks awful at the moment, but we do a bit of healing. I know that I'm going to erode this, so let's do some terracing just to break that up. Let's do some sub-terracing to really clean things and make it look broken and kind of weathered. And then let's do a simple erosion pass just to gel everything together. And this is the standard erosion node. Like I haven't really used anything else on this terrain, so this could look even better if I put a bit of time into this. But the next video, I'm going to take a look at the erosion node. So we're going to take this terrain that I have here and continue from this and just kind of see all of these different erosion nodes that we have and how they work and how each one can give us a varying result. So I'll see you guys on the next video, and I hope you found this useful.